Hey guys, welcome to, I guess this is kind of a review spew, but this is going to be a bit of an informal thing. I'm going to go through every single movie I saw in 2020 and review them all, because there are a couple on my list which I either didn't review, didn't want to, or just didn't get around to, but now I've got a list up here. This is going to be kind of just an unscripted me just telling my thoughts about what I thought of these movies. They're going to be really quick, maybe a couple sentence reviews and then onto them. This is going to be in two parts, basically from the movies that I thought were really bad to not so bad, and then a part two where it's just good to my favorite movies of the year. So without any further ado, like, share, and subscribe to the video. Going to be very informal today, just going to be talking freely to you guys. Here we go with number 38. So number 38 is Dolittle. I saw this one in the very first week of the year, and I mean, what can you say about it? For me, this movie is kind of just like Robert Downey Jr. wanted to get something started, have a bit of fun for his first thing after Endgame, do something where he didn't have to take himself way too seriously. He got a bunch of celebrities to come along with him. Like, the cast is really strong. It's just unfortunate that this movie is a complete dumpster fire. It has amazing actors. Like, Ray Fiennes is in this. Antonio Banderas is in it. Emma Thomas is in this. Like, all of these incredible, like, A-list, legitimate stars. And to just turn out with something so wretched. The jokes are so juvenile. I can't even figure out how a child would be entertained by this movie, because it treats its audience like 2-year-olds. There are multiple fart jokes. This movie was horrible. I gave it a 4 out of 10 the first time I saw it, but now, like, that would be scaled down way much more, because it is by far the worst movie of the year. Number 37 would be The Wrong Missy. It wasn't lowest on the list simply because of the fact that it was not as bad as I thought it would be. I thought that a rom-com starring David Spade and Lauren Lapkus could be so much worse than what it turned out to be, which I know is kind of ridiculous considering it's the second worst movie of the year. But I mean, this movie, it never made me laugh. It's just full of these very easy, safe Adam Sandler jokes. I guess it had a bit more of an edge. But I think someone should have just said to Lauren Lapkus, tone it down, but then they kind of realized what they were working on, and then they shut up and let her do her thing. David Spade, I think, sleepwalks through a performance. It's just literally made to show off and advertise this hotel holiday destination. It's a shocking movie, and terrible. What else is there to say? Number 36 is Scoob. Scoob was, like, fine for the first 15 minutes, as I said in my original review, but then I think about after that 15-minute point, they kind of introduced this crazy, weird Mark Wahlberg superhero plot. The movie went completely off the rails, considering the movie had basically been marketed like the Peanuts movie in 2015. Like, there were those side-by-side comparison shots where you had Scooby hugging Shaggy and Snoopy hugging Charlie Brown, and it was kind of like this cute little thing. It might have similar animation. They only really paid homage to the original in that opening 15 minutes, and they recreated the opening credits and everything, and then it turned into this crazy sci-fi epic, which just I was completely checked out for the rest of it. Number 35 is Eurovision. It's a Will Ferrell movie where Rachel McAdams, for some reason, really wants to get with Will Ferrell the whole movie. Like, I'm not gonna lie that there were some impressive set pieces, I guess, from like a music video point, but it was like a 2-hour and 10-minute Eurovision movie, and it overstayed its welcome. There were very little jokes that were funny at all. There was like one minor thing where involving a boat blowing up, which kind of made me laugh because it was just kind of just a weird circumstance for the characters to get in. But apart from that, it was just another just bad movie. 34 is Underwater. Now, Underwater is an odd one because it's not a bad movie. It's just we've seen this formula done so much better in a whole bunch of other movies where you take a group of small people and you put them in this situation where they're isolated and then you have some sort of monster attack them. I wrote a screenplay which was basically involved that formula. However, the problem with this movie is that they try something ambitious, which is basically setting up this... it throws them into the event straight up. It's basically like starting Alien off with the chestburster scene, and then the characters have to figure out what they're doing right off the bat. And they do try to develop them along the way, but it's very surface level. It's just like, oh, I have a dog, I have a daughter, and without really furthering any, there's never a scene where they sit down because they're always constantly in peril. And the movie tries really, really hard to try and even those two things out, but ultimately it just kind of leaves you with a hollow feeling, and the characters who do survive are like the least developed ones. Next is Mulan. I think with all of these Disney live action remakes, I think the more each one that comes out and each one that I do watch, because I have watched all of them, they just feel more soulless one after the other. I think this one maybe not so much as Lion King, because where Lion King was just straight up recreating, Mulan was definitely taking those sort of... It was taking the story structure, but changing up characters, certain motivations and stuff like that. However, the problem was that in doing that, everything that they did to justify remaking Mulan made the movie so much less interesting. Mulan was just... I don't like throwing the word like Mary Sue around because I hate it. But this one, she goes through almost zero challenges. There's no development. She's just, it's just as soon as she gets that camp, she is so much better than everyone else at everything. Meanwhile, in Mulan, there is a progression. Like by the end, sure, she can kick everyone's ass, but at least there's some sort of progression of that. Even though, like, sure, it's done over the length of one song, but the song is amazing, and this movie has no sort of soul behind it, and there's nothing that would ever make me want to rewatch this movie, because it is so just bland, generic. There's a couple of cool visual moments, but in that there are incredible leaps of logic that are just utterly stupid and ridiculous. I think that honestly there is a cool, like, epic Chinese story. It's just that I think that the way they told it was just the most bland and boring way you could do it. With Bad Boys for Life, it's actually not a movie that I hate. I know that, like, if you go back really early in the channel, you can find, like, my Bad Boys 1 and 2 reviews when I was just trying to, like, get numbers up. And, like, I obviously don't enjoy them because I just don't like Michael Bay. But I do like those movies more than a lot of other Michael Bay movies. But, you know, this one, it was what it was. It was a Bad Boys sequel, and, you know, while not having the same balls-to-the-wall action as, say, Bad Boys 2 was, it did tell a far more interesting story, I'll give it that. The villain was actually pretty well thought out, I'd say. It was fairly cliche, but, I mean, considering what the standards for a Bad Boys movie is, I actually kind of enjoyed it in that sense. I think that if you enjoy Bad Boys movies just on the whole, it's your bread and butter, but for me, it's kind of like, I know this is controversial, but it's like watching Zack Snyder's Justice League. Sure, it's better, but for me, it's still, I just don't enjoy Zack Snyder's films in general, so this really didn't do anything for me, and same with this Bad Boys movie. Downhill, I don't really remember much about it apart from the cinematography was absolutely breathtaking. I can't remember the guy who did it, but I remember seeing that he's won an Oscar or has been nominated for an Oscar before. Some of the shots of the Alps and everything were kind of beautiful. It's just too bad that it's a story that I think has been done before, because it is an American remake of, I think it's a Norwegian film, and it's just that I think Julia Louis-Dreyfus does a really good job. It's just Will Ferrell as a dramatic actor, it just does not work at all. I think the story is absolutely uncompelling. It really just plods along really slowly. It's a lot of these comedic actors trying to, like, throw their hat into the dramatic role, which Will Ferrell has definitely dabbled in, but I think that it just doesn't quite work in this film. But yeah, like, cinematography is actually kind of breathtaking. I'd recommend it for that alone, but just watch like a supercut of the shots from the movie, not the actual plot of it, because it's very boring, I'd have to say. Number 30 is Wonder Woman 1984, which we've gone through in depth multiple times. Look, it's just kind of 2.5 hours of a bumbling, slow plot, which never really gets going. Of course, the amazing leaps in logic of the whole wishing rock thing is stupid. The fact that she spends about an hour and 20 minutes of the movie just not being Wonder Woman, and I get that they're setting up everything and it is ambitious. I think that's just not why people are paying to go see a Wonder Woman movie. They want to see Gal Gadot kicking ass, or Gal Gadot. And I think that while there is a good movie hiding in there, like Pedro Pascal's intriguing, and I do admire, one thing I do admire about this film is the fact that for the first time in a superhero movie, no one dies. Like, considering where the DC universe basically starts off with Man of Steel with at least 1 million people dying, we get to the point of, like, this movie where not a single person in the whole world dies as a result of it. Like, there's that one woman where she's like, I wish I was dead, but look, I think that the story is, it's just all over the place, and Wonder Woman as a character is not written well. There's nothing really intriguing about her, which is why they need to kind of dig up Steve Trevor, so they can basically just do a flip reverse of their relationship from the first movie, and they can do the whole fish out of water thing, which does work well. It's just we saw it already done so much better beforehand, because it wasn't like when Steve got to the 1980s, it was all like, oh man, there's some sort of conflict like when Wonder Woman got to the 1940s during World War, and her idealism is shaken. Meanwhile, Steve is just like, oh, I guess I need stretch pants, or I need to wear bum bags. Next one is The Witches. I mean, like, there's so many movies on here which I've just completely forgotten about. I think I actually enjoyed some of it. I think the fact that I watched the original 1990 version the night before really dampened my enjoyment of this one, because that 1990s, I think it's like there's a lot of Jim Henson puppet work in there, is kind of incredible. And it's an 80-minute movie. It gets in and it tells a really clean plot with some really disturbing moments. Some of those practical effects are absolutely stunning. This movie, although I love Robert Zemeckis, I feel like it has a very generic approach to, I think, the whole story, and also the CGI compared to the amazing practical effects is not well done. I think that Anne Hathaway, like, who doesn't love Anne Hathaway? But I think when you compare her to, like, Angelica Houston, who is absolutely chewing up the scenery with those massive prosthetic makeups, and even when she doesn't have anything on, it's just so fantastic. Or like the scene where she's like trying to get the word children out, and she's beautiful in the movie. Meanwhile, Anne Hathaway's just got her big CGI mouth and her chicken feet arms or whatever. And while there were moments in the film that I thought, wow, this is genuinely fucked up, I just don't think it took enough steps in that direction. And it just felt like a very play it safe-ish movie. I like Chris Rock as the voiceover, and I do like that the ending was actually faithful to the book compared to the original movie, where apparently test audiences weren't too happy about it. I think, look, I'd actually recommend this one. I did have a good time watching it, and look, Robert Zemeckis is one of my all-time favorite directors. It's just that unfortunately there's just, when you compare it to that original 1990s one, it just doesn't have that same charm and overall, I guess, horror of it, which is, it's really a demented children's horror movie, that one, much like I say Gremlins would be. Next up was The Invisible Man. This is probably my most controversial pick on this list. I'm fascinated by the whole premise of the Invisible Man movie. Now, I remember in my original review, I did say that I wanted them to take the premise of an original man, say, a tad less seriously, because this movie is definitely played 100% straight, and And while I definitely enjoyed those sort of straight aspects of the film, I did find that I was never, like, genuinely scared. There were moments where I thought that, oh, that's a cool little neat effect, like the way they show him turning up the fire, or the way that they use the breath. They are good moments in terms of taking advantage of an Invisible Man thing, and I did find the twist well done. It's just I don't think I appreciated at the time what the film was trying to say about domestic abuse and those sort of violent relationships, and how that was more of the theme of the film rather than just being a straight up horror movie where a girl's ex-boyfriend hunts her, and you see how it kind of affects her in that way. However, there's still that weird part of me which inside yearns for a less 100% serious Invisible Man movie, and I was kind of hoping that they would take it in sort of more of that direction. But as it is, it's a pretty solid horror movie, and I did get a lot of enjoyment out of it. It's just that I wasn't completely sold by the whole plot of it. There were numerous moments where I was just like, well, how come they haven't use security cameras here, or why have they locked her up here, or why haven't they done this? And while there are definitely interesting visual moments, I think the story as a whole just didn't really have me intrigued by it. Number 27 is Birds of Prey. Look, it's an alright movie. There were some cool action scenes. I mean, the movie is just definitely trying to say, alright, we're not dark and gritty DC anymore, we're Deadpool DC now. Like, Harley Quinn talks to the camera every other scene. There were some cool visual moments. Like, I did like that fight in the fun house. Some of like the bits in her apartment I thought were really cool. The baseball bat fight was like genuinely kind of disturbing in a fun way. Apart from that though, it just felt like a movie that the voiceover exposition is used to such an extent where we need literally everything spelled out for us, and someone's Harley Quinn goes there, so we gotta spend 15 minutes talking about who this is, who that is. And I mean, another part of this new wave of self-referential humor is that when you point out something like a flaw, like, oh, she talks like she's a cop from an 80s movie, it doesn't make it smart, though, the fact that just because you're addressing something that's cliche like this, there needs to be some sort of double up on the joke. You can't just say, oh, look how badly we've written this character. Aren't we smart for pointing it out? Can't do that. I think that what Birds of Prey for me struggled with is just kind of like the story just leaps all over the place. It never really feels focused. Ewan McGregor shows up maybe once every 20 minutes just to kind of remind us that he's the bad guy, but I can't even remember what his plan was, just to blow up something or someone. 26 is New Mutants. Performances were pretty good. I didn't hate the special effects. It just felt like, to me, it just felt like if you've watched any horror movie ever, nothing in this movie is going to surprise you in the least. It is a genuinely ambitious take for like and there is a lot of promise for something effective in this movie. The fact that these young children are locked in this asylum and they've all got these weird superpowers which they haven't quite got a grasp of. I just think that the execution is so unbelievably clumsy. None of the scares work because everything is just weird CGI and not good CGI either. This movie was on the back burner, has been on the back burner since like, what, 2017, 2018, or it's been in production. I just don't feel like this movie took advantage of everything it could have been. It could have been a really disturbing horror movie about people learning their powers. But unfortunately, it was just kind of a generic sort of, oh, look at these kids, they're doing things. I did find it interesting that there was an LGBT relationship in that, and they actually did have a kind of a cute relationship, but apart from that, the movie just took a very generic approach. Coming up on number 25 is Fat Man with Mel Gibson and Walton Goggins. The premise I actually found really interesting for this movie, like the fact that it was like Santa Claus but a hard R take on it with Mel Gibson of all people. the movie, I think, definitely was hindered by its extremely low budget. Like, the production design was very kind of stark and boring. The color palette on the screen, it was just sort of this grey brown, which just, I was just looking at it and it felt like nothing. It was, at least it did feel like the final payoff was quite interesting. I just think that, unfortunately, as a whole, while I got a kick out of some certain scenes and there is some beautiful violence in it, there is just far too many scenes of just people just shooting their guns at each other for an extended period of time. There are some moments of dark comedy which I found quite amusing, but apart from that, not much else. Next is Happiest Season. Kristen Stewart plays a Kristen Stewart character, and there's a lot of talk about who the character should have ended up with. I mean, maybe if you added another 20 to 30 minutes on top of that to make it so that Kristen Stewart's character ends up with Aubrey Plaza, like, maybe you could do that. Apart from that, it's just told an extremely straightforward story considering where it ended up. I think when you tell these sort of... I do admire them for going for basically just a straight up rom-com sort of setup, but with an LGBT relationship. However, I just don't think they explored it in a way that was interesting at all. Like, I think that when Hollywood makes these types of films, they just feel like they're pushing at the very bare minimum in sort of films like this. I feel like when say in French movies, like, I will always compare movies like this to Portrait of a Lady on Fire, because when you take a relationship like this and you put it in a situation where it might not be as accepted as it would, say, from where they come from, it can lead to really interesting, fascinating character dynamics, moments of dialogue, still expressions, which are so meaningful and impactful. Meanwhile, this film just kind of played it off for awkward comedy rather than any sort of depthful character building or motivation. I think that in the future, there is a chance for Hollywood to take more independent film, like, sort of approaches to stuff like this, where you've actually got the real sort of, oh, well, what if my family doesn't accept me? And this film basically was just like, oh, hey, you don't really love me, and then, yes, I do, I'm just embarrassed about my family, and then by the end of the movie, it's just the simplest thing to resolve. I don't want to call the next movie on this list bad, so I'm just going to end this video here. Sorry for just this rambling, stupid video. This is just basically me going on films that some of them I haven't seen in over a year. I'm just trying to scramble what I can remember in my head, but this is just ranking every single one of them. So I'll be back next time for my best of 2020 list. So see you then. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to The Young Cynics. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Spotify. And I'll see you next time.